Over the years, the video games industry has barely been out of the news for one reason or another, be it for amazing technological advancements, huge new releases, or brilliant innovations. Sadly though, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and for every good news story, there have been a whole load of bad ones. We're used to publishers and developers overhyping games that have turned out to be a barrel of hot garbage, or seeing companies participating in unscrupulous business practices. Loot boxes. But whilst those occurrences may well have us clutching our pearls for a moment or two, generally they're forgotten about as soon as another bad thing takes everyone's attention. For this list, we're here to look at the happenings that truly shocked the world, gaining mass media attention and leaving an ugly stain on gaming's permanent record, whether deservedly or not. I'm PETA from TripleJump, and here are 10 incidents that rocked the video games industry. Number 10. PETA versus Pokémon. Just to clarify, no, not this PETA. It feels like the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, aka PETA, often get their undergarments in a bunch over the most trivial of things, and over the past decade they've taken repeated shots at the video game industry. By 2012, they'd already targeted freemium game Mafia Wars, not over the violence against people depicted in the game, but for the use of pit bulls as guard dogs, and also Mario for allegedly promoting the skinning of Tanuki for the purposes of fashion. Not content with dragging the name of one beloved franchise needlessly through the mud, they then turned their attention to Pokémon. Shortly after the Japanese release of Pokémon Black and White, PETA released a statement alleging that the franchise glorified cruelty to animals and that the keeping of Pokémon in Pokeballs was akin to keeping real-life animals in chains. They also created their own version of the game in which Pokémon could battle their trainers in order to achieve freedom. The whole thing was rather bizarre, but it still hit headlines hard, and regardless of whether people were on PETA's side or not, it still got them talking about the organisation. I suppose there's no such thing as bad press, right? Number 9. Peter Molyneux's GODUS. It's fair to say that Peter Molyneux doesn't have the best reputation when it comes to his games actually doing what he says they're going to do. From Fable's plethora of missing features to the somewhat creepy Project Milo, the game designer is notorious for over-promising and under-delivering. That's code for lying. This trend would continue with the development of GODUS, a spiritual successor to Molyneux's earlier creation, Populous. Despite a successful crowdfunding campaign that raised the best part of £500,000, the game has remained in early access on Steam since 2013 and hasn't seen any updates since 2016. The real controversy, however, came in the form of Molyneux's social experiment, Curiosity: What's Inside the Cube, an app that required players to dig to the centre of a giant cube made up of billions of tiny squares. The grand prize at the centre of the cube was allegedly going to be life-changing. Then, the winner of the game, Brian Henderson, was told that he would become the sole all-powerful digital god of GODUS and would receive a portion of the game's profits. Sadly, this never came to fruition, and Molyneux has stated that since the game hasn't made any money, Henderson won't receive a dime. It's not all bad news though, as Devolver Digital and Roll7 heard of the controversy and included Henderson as an NPC in their game, not a hero. I love a happy ending, don't you? Number 8. StarCraft 2 Match Fixing. We all know that the world of regular sports has a seedy underbelly of doping scandals and cheating controversies, but you might not be aware that equally salacious activities take place in the world of esports as well. Back in 2015 and 2016, several professional StarCraft 2 players and a coach were charged by authorities with match fixing, after they manipulated the outcomes of a number of games in order to influence the outcome of various gambling exploits. esports. This came just a few years after a handful of Korean pro players gained international notoriety by fixing and betting on STARCRAFT matches. Allegedly, brokers posing as fans would meet with the gamers and have their financial backers pay them large sums of money in return for purposefully losing. The players and coach were all slapped with suspended prison sentences, hefty fines, and were banned from competing in professional STARCRAFT competitions indefinitely. The community was unsurprisingly outraged, with other players coming forward to share their feelings of betrayal, along with personal stories of being approached by brokers asking them to throw games. Internationally, the integrity of the entire Korean STARCRAFT competitive scene was called into question, and the Korean Esports Association shared plans to sue those involved in order to prevent any further cases. Number 7. KANE and LYNCH gets GameSpot employee fired. When we read a review of a game, we like to think that we're seeing the genuine thoughts of the critic. Unfortunately, certain occurrences have us questioning the journalistic integrity of some of our favoured publications, sometimes leaving us unable to trust them at all. One such case was that of Jeff Gerstmann, former editorial director of GameSpot, who found himself at the centre of a huge scandal back in 2007. At the time, Eidos Interactive had been heavily marketing KANE and LYNCH Dead Men, and had spent a large amount of cash on advertising on the GameSpot website. When it came to reviewing the game, however, Gerstmann was not super impressed with KANE and LYNCH, giving it a middling score of 6 out of 10. Shortly afterwards, Gerstmann was fired from GameSpot, though due to a non-disclosure agreement, neither party would share why the editor had been let go. This led to speculation that Eidos had pressured the website to terminate Gerstmann over the review, and had readers questioning whether the publication could be trusted if its scores were indeed being bought by publishers. Eventually, the NDA was nullified, and Gerstmann confirmed that his termination was as a direct result of Eidos' threat to pull advertising revenue, leaving an ugly stain on GameSpot's reputation. Number 6. The 2011 PSN hack. Over the years, the rise of the internet has meant that people are becoming more and more concerned about the security of the details they hold online, with companies coming under massive scrutiny to ensure that they're doing everything possible to ensure the safety of their customers' information. Sadly, Sony became embroiled in a scandal in 2011 when the personal details of 77 million of its users were leaked. The attack, which occurred at some point between the 17th and 19th of April, forced Sony to shut down the PlayStation Network for a whopping 23 days while they investigated what had gone wrong. To add insult to injury, though, Sony failed to notify users of the severity of the breach until over a week after it happened, meaning that millions of people's personal details, including their names, addresses, emails, usernames, and passwords, were compromised, with users not being able to act to re-secure them. Naturally, players were furious, and Sony were forced to acknowledge the severe failings on their part, offering a welcome back package of free games to all users. Not only did this incident dramatically undermine Sony's integrity, but it also cost them over $170 million to rectify. Oof. Ouch. Number 5. KONAMI vs KOJIMA. Forget Brad and Jen, Miley and Liam, and even Kim and Kanye, because truly the most shocking breakup of the past few years has got to be the messy split of Konami and Hideo Kojima. It was all going so well. Kojima had been creating games with Konami for the best part of 30 years, but things started to get weird in 2015, and not the good kind of Kojima weird, when Konami announced a corporate restructure, but failed to clarify what this meant for Hideo. They then removed all references to the auteur from the Metal Gear website and the Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes promotional materials. They also cancelled Silent Hills and renamed Kojima Productions Los Angeles to Konami Los Angeles Studio, but insisted that Kojima would continue to develop Metal Gear games. This all came to a head in December 2015 when Konami refused to allow Kojima to attend the Game Awards to collect his accolades for the Phantom Pain, and Kojima left in order to found his own independent studio. Ultimately, the whole thing came down to a clash in ideologies. Kojima is a visionary that gives little thought for the business side of things, whereas Konami was only interested in the cold hard cash. Sadly, we can't imagine they've been able to stay friends. But at least Kojima's got Jeff Keighley, am I right? Best buds for life. Number 4. Fox News versus Mass Effect. Whilst it's well established that Fox News is to journalistic integrity what Ride to Hell Retribution is to being a good video game, their assault on Mass Effect really does take the biscuit. Upon its release in 2008, Mass Effect came under fire from Fox News, who took to the air to accuse the game of featuring full frontal nudity and of effectively being a sex simulator aimed at children. Despite assurances to the contrary from Jeff Keighley, the show's presenter and so-called psychological expert continued to assert that the game was not only highly violent, but that a good portion of the game was taken up by graphic sex. These claims are, of course, nonsense, and although poor Jeff did his best to clarify the situation by reassuring audiences that the scene in question is A, optional, and B, nowhere near as lengthy or explicit as it was being made out to be, Fox continued with the rhetoric, even though both the presenter and psychologist admitted to not having played the game. Unfortunately, this negative press would have a knock-on impact on Mass Effect 2, as developers ended up removing a same-sex relationship from the game at the 11th hour due to fear of similar backlash. Number 3. When E.T. killed the industry. Look, we've all made mistakes in our lives, but few of us have made a mistake so big that we've had to literally bury it in the New Mexico desert. Developed and published by Atari and based on the film of the same name, E.T. the Extraterrestrial is a cautionary tale of why attempting to develop a video game in just 5 weeks is a terrible idea. Absolutely everything about the eponymous alien's foray into the world of video games was panned, with complaints leveled at the disappointing story, especially when compared to the film that inspired it, the convoluted gameplay mechanics, and the graphics, which many described as primitive even in 1982. Despite selling over 2.6 million copies by the end of the year, as many as 700,000 were returned, and a further 3.5 million went unsold, which meant that the game was not only awful to play, but also a huge financial failure. The impact on Atari contributed to the video game crash of 1983, and rumours started to circulate that truckloads of Atari game cartridges had been buried under a layer of concrete in the New Mexico desert. After diggers were hired to investigate the claims in 2014, this turned out to be true. Jesus, talk about nearly burying the industry. Number 2. Doom blamed for the Columbine massacre. Fair warning, viewers, we will be touching on some pretty heavy stuff here, so if you'd rather not hear about it, please skip ahead to the timestamp on screen to get to our number 1 entry, which incidentally is also pretty heavy in a different way. For those unfamiliar, the Columbine massacre took place on April the 20th, 1999, when 2 high school seniors entered Columbine High School in Colorado, murdered 12 students and a teacher, and injured 21 others. The tragedy shook the world, with the question on many people's minds being, why has this happened? To this day, no one has been able to give an answer with any kind of certainty, and whilst the FBI theorizes that the mental state of the perpetrators likely played a huge role in the atrocity, many parties have pointed the finger of blame at everyone from Marilyn Manson to 1993's first-person shooter, Doom. Prior to the events in Columbine, Doom had already drawn the ire of many groups due to the graphic violence and demonic imagery it contained. Following the shooting, however, the debate surrounding the link between video games and real-world violence was brought back into the public consciousness when it was found that the pair responsible were obsessed with the game. Though many studies have shown that video games don't incite violent behavior in players, there are still those that wrongly attribute such atrocities to the influence of gaming. This not only places the responsibility for these horrific acts with the wrong people, but it also stands in the way of truly understanding why mass shootings occur in the first place, and prevents us from finding a way to stop them in the future. And number 1, severe and repeated mistreatment of employees. Many video game companies are guilty of enforcing crunch time, a horrid practice in which employees are expected to work ridiculous hours in order to meet deadlines, usually without overtime pay. One disgruntled spouse of an EA staffer wrote that her husband was forced to work from 9 AM until 10 PM 7 days per week during the crunch, with the occasional Saturday evening off for good behaviour. It's like a bloody prison sentence. Sadly though, this would prove to be but the tip of the iceberg, as reports of horrendous work environments would surface from various different companies all around the world, whether it be the alleged Orwellian conditions at KONAMI, or reports of staff forced to go hungry whilst working for Activision Blizzard. The latter has also come under additional fire recently after investigations found sexism and sexual harassment to be the norm at the offices. At the time of recording, this particular scandal is still ongoing, though sadly, we don't expect it to be the last the industry sees.